Well, hello, everyone. Welcome, friends. See a lot of familiar faces here, and thank you for joining the Advocates Briefing for AB 1177, the California Public Banking Option Act. I'm Trinity Tran with the California Public Banking Alliance, and we are so excited to partner with SEIU California and the California Reinvestment Coalition, and a growing list of allied organizations, along with 18 senators and assembly members on this new, exciting, this bold bill to provide Californians with a no fee, no penalty account and access to essential banking service. And I'd like to encourage everyone to say hello by dropping your name and your organization in the chat. AB 1177, this is considered a soft launch. We're officially launching the bill at our press conference on March 30th at 10 a.m. to save the date for that. But in this briefing, we wanted to reach out to community members and provide an overview of the bill and why this legislation is such a crucial step towards offering a public banking option for the unbanked and the underbanked and low-income communities, and allows people across the state of California to be able to access basic banking services in non-predatory and non-extractive ways. And this is really important in California, where nearly 1 out of 4 people are unbanked and underbanked, which means they don't have access to a checking account or credit checking account. And even despite having a bank account, they still have to rely on alternative predatory financial services like payday lenders and prepaid debit cards. And if you've been following the public banking movement, a central goal of our movement is to democratize finance, and that's why we see AB 1177 as such a necessary step forward, because it's important that we provide a direct solution to the for-profit motive behind banking, which have harmed our communities, especially low-wage workers, especially Black and brown folks. Because when poor folks don't have to pay more for financial service, that means they have fewer opportunities to build credit. They're rejected for loans, and this amounts to a real tremendous disadvantage for people, especially people of color, to be able to save, to be able to grow their wealth, and to build security and a quality of life. So this will impact millions across the state, because about half of the Black households in California and about 40% of Latino households right now don't have access or adequate access to the financial system. And when you compare this to the 15% of white households who are unbanked and underbanked, that's a shocking division, between 40 to 50% for Black and brown households who don't have access to the financial system versus 15% of white households. That division is something that needs to be bridged. And that is why we see AB 1177 as the crucial part to helping bridge that gap by providing much needed and an urgent solution to bringing people who have been shut out of the financial system with a way to access the system. And this is ultimately about creating an inclusive financial system that serves California's most disadvantaged populations by increasing financial access to those who need it most. So we welcome you to this briefing and thank all of you for joining us to learn more about our plan to help close the racial and financial gap. As an overview of our agenda today, our lead champion on AB 1177, Assemblymember Miguel Santiago, will be joining the call to say a few words. He's actually currently in transit, driving down from the Capitol. So we'll hope to have Assemblymember Miguel Santiago on to start with us with a few remarks, followed by a presentation from Paulina Gonzalez-Brito with California Reinvestment Coalition, and then Felipe Casteres with SEIU 721 will present, and we'll open up the floor for a Q&A session and then wrap with our call to action. So we ask that everyone please go on mute during our presentation, and if you have questions, drop them into the chat and we'll moderate in the final Q&A portion of the meeting. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Miguel Santiago. He has been a champion working with us in the trenches for the past few years in boldly led public banking in the California state legislature, even when it was a relatively new idea to most legislatures. I mean, we got to give it up to Assemblymember Santiago, because it was his incredible political maneuvering and commitment that helped us land a win as the first state in the nation to pass legislation empowering cities and counties to form their own publicly owned financial institution, which then really became a catalyst for all of these public banking movements that have sprung up across the nation within the last few years. So we welcome you, Assemblymember Miguel Santiago.
How are you to everybody? Trinity, a big round of applause for Trinity and everybody in the Banking Alliance up and down the state of California. I'm absolutely excited to continue the next level of work. And we've got bigger partners who are involved now. We've got SCIU and the labor movement, UFCW, and allies all across the country who are going to engage in this. Now, I want to give credit where credit is due, because the California Public Banking Alliance in our own backyard, the LA Banking Alliance, really started this movement years ago by initiating on the city council a ballot measure. And then they came to talk to us, Mr. Chu from San Francisco and myself. And we talked about the possibility of getting a public bank for the state of California. So we did a little bit better than that. We put a bill called AB 857 together, and that allowed for local municipal banks up and down the state. And there are some now that are going through the process of putting banks together for local municipalities. And the concept is pretty simple. A public bank for the public good, not for shareholders and stockholders or for profiteering. And we all know that we need a bank for the public good. And that's what those local municipal banks are going to do. So when we talked about the next level of public banking, we decided to double down, triple down on our efforts and start that conversation last year. And that was AB 310, which most of you or all of you supported. But let me tell you something really important to understand about the public bank movement and the impact that you've had across the country. Because I firmly believe, it's not this bill that went through 857, we would not be having a larger national conversation about public banking. In fact, it is the only bill that has ever gotten through any state house or federal on public banking in the country that I'm aware of. And it's a first in the history. In fact, earlier today, we were talking to some reporters and they had verified first in the history, only public bank bill that have ever gotten through. Now let's double and why it's important. You also got to remember this. When we did the first public banks bill, it was the only bill in the legislature in any history of the legislature that did not have this magnitude, where it stood up and went up against Wall Street without a single lobbyist. We had zero lobbyists on our side, and it was a people-powered movement driven by the grassroots leadership and driven by community members and by activism. We had people weigh in, like Senator Bernie Sanders, who tweeted out. We had Our Revolution tweeted out. We had many of the organizations who are on board right now tweet out. And in fact, AOC, when Governor Newsom signed it, tweeted out a congratulations to him for signing this. So we've got some historic movement to now double down on our efforts, triple down, quadruple down on these efforts to make sure that we get a state bank, a state public bank. And that's going to be Bank Cal. Let me tell you how this is going to work in its simplest terms, because you'll hear a lot about it today. And we're going to need each and every single one of you to engage on getting this bill done. We're going to have the ability to create a bank with zero fees, zero penalties, to bank the unbanked, to serve those underserved communities. And a time when we're talking about equity, we're going to strike right at the heart of it and go with that banking system to provide that for our low-income communities, communities of color up and down the state. And we know that those $15 wage earners and below are about 80% of those people who are unbanked. And we know that the majority of our communities of color who have been left behind. And we know that if we want to get more progressive stuff done in the state of California, this is absolutely central and key to getting that done. So it'll also give us the ability, let's be clear, the ability to build that collaboration with local municipal banks. So we'll have the state public bank option for folks, which will be able to tie in directly to the local municipal banks that are being created today because of your hard work and advocacy. So this is taking it to the next level, and we're hoping that you'll join and we'll continue to advocate. And imagine what we could do if we work together with our partners in labor, and we're going to get this done. We're absolutely going to get this done. This is going to be a national movement, and we will celebrate, and we will be excited when this thing gets done. So thank you, Trinity, and I know Sushil's on there and a whole mess of other people that I can continue to name off, but we're extremely excited, grateful, And I also want to just one more round of applause for SCIU has joined us to make sure this happens, UFCW, and a whole host of folks. This is just the beginning. So hang on tight. We're going to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Miguel Santiago. And up next, I'd like to introduce Paulina Gonzalez Brito. She is the Executive Director of the California Reinvestment Coalition. And Paulina and CRC have been longtime allies in the movement in banking accountability and really understands the need to be able to innovate and evolve the financial system with social justice and racial justice baked into its design. And Paulina actually just recently testified at the House Committee on Financial Services hearing on achieving racial equity through financial services with Congressman Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, among other progressive allies. So I'll hand it over to Paulina. She and Cecile have prepared a PowerPoint presentation on AB 1177. Welcome, Paulina.
Thanks, Trinity. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon and spending a little bit of time learning about this really amazing bill. As Trinity explained and the Assembly member explained, this is really about building off a public banking movement to build build on the larger public banking movement to build an alternative to the extractive Wall Street system that we know takes from our communities and gives nothing back, and to really include communities of color, immigrant communities, workers into a public banking system that works for them. And so we're really trying to reimagine a banking system here that works for all Californians and really provides a different option for them. So that's AB 1177. And now I'm going to go into some of the details here in this presentation to give you an idea of what it's going to do. So as Trinity began to explain, 1 in 4 Californians are unbanked or underbanked. And what that means is if you're unbanked, you're completely disconnected from any financial institution. You don't have a checking account, you don't have a savings account or a debit or credit card, you don't have direct deposit. If you're underbanked, you might have a bank account, but you're also turning to really high cost financial services like payday loans, check cashing. You're paying a percentage of your check to these check cashers, or you're using prepaid debit cards, right? So these are these really extractive services that we're talking about that take a chunk of your money, and it's not going back into the economy. It's not going back to feed your family. So next slide, please. Oops, wrong way. So who are we talking about when we're talking about the unbanked and underbanked? Who is it in California? So if we look at the unbanked and underbanked, we're talking about 43% are workers that are making less than $15 an hour. They're the working families, right? Who are making less than $15 an hour. There are 41% of Latino California households are unbanked or underbanked, and 46% of Black California households are unbanked or underbanked. And then we're talking also about disabled California households. 44% are unbanked. And we could go on and on about the historically marginalized and disenfranchised and excluded. And I'd like to say that this is not an accident by Wall Street, right? This is purposeful. This is the way the system was built in order to exclude certain communities from having access to financial services. And it's built into the DNA of Wall Street banks. Next slide, please. So what is BankCal? What is it going to do? It's a public option bank account available to all Californians. It's meant to, as Trinity said, close that financial services gap to serve the people who've been left out of traditional banking. It's meant to bolster the economy instead of having, these high-cost financial services companies take that money and extract it from people's bank accounts, or I'm sorry, from their paychecks. It's meant to actually have that money in people's pockets and spent the way it should be spent for food, for rent, for things that they need, and put back into the economy. And it's meant to be an equitable, it's meant to bolster an equitable economic recovery in a stable way through an accessible platform that serves all Californians, but more importantly, to make it an equitable recovery from the pandemic. Next slide, please. So what can you do if you have this BankCal What if you're an account holder? What can you do as an account holder? Well, really, you can do a lot of the things that most people can do with a traditional bank account. You, first of all, will not pay any fees or penalties. And in doing this work, we've learned that if you're an account holder, let's say at one of the big Wall Street banks, and you're getting hit with overdraft fees, monthly fees, you're getting hit with fees for not having enough money in your account every month. That is what pushes people out of the banking system. And we know that that's detrimental to their financial health. It widens the racial income and wealth gap. And so through this BankCal account, it'll be completely, there will be no fees or penalties for the user, for the account holder. You'll be able to use the debit card wherever debit cards are accepted, including ATMs through the network. You can use direct deposit. So the way that this will be set up is if you set up your account with BankCal, you'll be able to choose direct deposit, and the employer will have to respect that direct deposit that you've set up with BankCal. You can pay automatic bill pay. Many of us use that if we have a bank account and set up those automatic bill pays. And we could, through this infrastructure, then work with the state of California, with the federal government, to streamline public benefits through the debit card itself, which allows for some cost savings through the public benefits program, but also for the end user who might be paying fees through ATMs. And then it creates an infrastructure to build additional features into the account, like building credit, managing debt, and international remittances, which is very important for our immigrant community here in California. Next slide, please. So this is a lot of words that are really small, and even with my glasses, it's hard to read. So I'll try to go through it with you to help you understand some of the technical aspects of how this will be set up. So you see the account holders on one side, and this is, expanding access to that 1 in 4 Californians who are unbanked and underbanked is the main goal here. There's a network administrator, and that network administrator is really the nuts and bolts of this program. They're the ones that are managing and coordinating the financial services with the vendors that provide the accounts to the bank account holders. They're the ones issuing the debit cards and working through the ATM network. And they're really, kind of the nuts and bolts that hold this program together. Then you have the program administrator. And this is the program administrator is working closely with the treasurer's office. They're coordinating with the treasurer's office. They're managing the website, which is a portal for account holders to sign up for the program, and also a portal for employers and direct deposit. And if we're able to use the public benefit, I would say the public benefits feature, they would also manage that. And then you have, and I should say these two areas, the network administrator and the program administrator, are it's decided through an RFP process, an open RFP process. Then you have the state treasurer's office, which holds, they staff the board, the BankCal board that you see here, and they manage the relationship with the program administrator and the contracts with the program administrator. Then, very importantly, this is where Trinity talked about democratizing finance, and that is a key component of having a BankCal program that really meets the mission that we talked about here. So we will have the treasurer on the BankCal board and the DFPI commissioner on the BankCal board. But most importantly, we will have racial justice advocates, consumer advocates, public bank advocates, worker on the board, to really ensure that the mission of this board stays aligned with what we're talking about here, and that we don't go off onto some other track. So the BankCal board is critical to the success of this program. Next slide, please. So this, you heard Assemblymember Santiago talk about the Public Banking Act that was the first in the country, that allowed for local governments and agencies to create their own public banks. And what I just want to really emphasize with this chart here is that this is what I said earlier, that BankCal is part of a ecosystem of public banking, of democratizing finance, of building an ecosystem of financial services that are public for people of color in California, for immigrants, for those that have been disenfranchised and deliberately excluded from traditional financial services. So BankCal gives a public option for financial services. It's being introduced this year with Assemblymember Santiago as our champion. And then we have Cal Savers that was launched in 2019, which gives a public option for retirement savings, which many workers have been excluded from. And we have the Cal Kids and Scholar Share, which gives a public option for college savings. This really is about providing public options for workers, for Black, Indigenous, people of color, to be able to build a financial ecosystem that allows us to be able to enter the financial services world in a way that closes that racial wealth gap in California and across the country. I think this is, next slide, please. Oh, and we just want to point out that we have a growing number of joint authors and co-authors. It's really an impressive list with our champion at the top as a joint author with Assembly Member Lorena Gonzalez, Ash Kalra, Buffy Wicks, Wendy Carrillo, David Chu, of course, and then co-authors like Senator Maria Elena Durazo and Assembly Member Ralph Bonta. And so we're really excited with this impressive list of authors to really take this on in this session. And hopefully with many of you on this call, we'll also get your support. Next slide. And of course, our sponsors, so you have the California Public Banking Alliance, the California Reinvestment Coalition, who I represent. We have 300 organizational members across the state of California working in low-income communities and communities of color to close the racial wealth gap and take on Wall Street. And many of you, I see some of our members on the call. And then we have SEIU California. And we have some of our supporters listed here, really impressive list of Partnership for Working Families and ACRE and so many, Fight for 15, so many others who've joined us in this fight. Next slide, please. And you can endorse us, endorse 1177 at bankcalnow.com. So please take a visit at the website. There's a lot more information there that you can learn more about the bill. And so Trinity, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Paulina. And now I'd like to introduce Felipe Caceres. He is an organizer with SEIU 721, and Felipe is going to discuss why the BankCal proposal is going to be such an important part of helping working families in California. SEIU 721 represents about 91,000 workers in Southern California in fast food and healthcare, hospital, public service workers. And of course, that 721 is part of SEIU California, which represents over 700,000 workers in California, many of whom are low-wage workers, which makes it even so much more critical that this legislation passes to help bring relief to working people across the state and create a way for workers to be able to access funds in a way that isn't extractive or predatory. So with that, I'd like to welcome Felipe.
Thank you, Trinity, and welcome everybody. And we're excited to be here as SEIU California and as SEIU Local 721. Again, my name is Felipe Cáceres. And like Trinity said, we represent a lot of workers across California, over 700,000 SEIU California, and our local in Southern California represents 95,000 city workers, public sector workers, but also, more importantly for this discussion, many low-wage workers that are underbanked and unbanked. And SEIU is a proud endorser of BankCal. And we're proud to be here with you all today among fellow racial justice, social justice advocates, organizations, because much like our workers in the Fight for 15 in fast food, whether it's gig workers, whether it's long-term care workers, healthcare workers, I'm here to talk about the difference that having public banking and an option like BankCal would make for everyday workers. When we're talking about 1 in 4 workers, everyone on this call has interacted with somebody in the past week that would be affected by AB 1177. Not just SEIU members, but folks who are future union members or should be union members. For generations, banks have effectively shut out these workers, our members. SEIU is one of the fastest growing unions in the nation, and our members have been consistently locked out of these benefits that BankCal will allow. These low-wage workers that for every white worker, $9.72 in wealth, a black worker has $1. For every $8.26 in wealth, a Latino worker has $1. These are realities that our members have faced for generations, but our future members, our fast food workers, our long-term care workers, gig workers face this every day. They have to get a bank card, they have to get a debit card that puts them in a situation that they never get out of. They have a fast food job, they have a long-term care job, they have a gig job, while these banks get 3 bites at the apple. Our economy has shifted into the digital age, and these workers continue and continue to be exploited by these industries. BankCal is a solution for these workers to have access to everyday needs that most people take advantage of. On a daily basis, people go to the grocery store, they access different food, they pay for services, or they just buy their kids an ice cream. A fast food worker can get behind in their rent as a result of one overdraft fee. The pandemic and recession have exposed how exclusionary this banking system is. So SEIU California, along with SEIU Local 721, is urging everyone to sign on and please endorse, as you see in the chat, AB 1177 today, not just for our members in SEIU, but for the 25% of low-wage workers that have been victim to these predatory lenders. Thank you, Trinity. And Assemblyman Santiago, thank you especially. I want to give him a shout out. He's been on the front lines for fast food workers all last week, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Felipe. And as you see, Cecile and Tom have dropped the endorsement links into the chat. So if you are an individual, there is a separate link for individuals to endorse. If you're part of an organization, please reach out to your organizations and have them endorse AB 1177, the California Public Banking Option Act, so that we can bring banking access to the people of California. And now we'll open it up for Q&A. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. And I'd also like to introduce Michelle Healy with SEIU California to join the Q&A panel. Again, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. Everyone's on board? Or raise your hand, or you can use the raise your hand function with using the reaction button at the bottom of the screen. Okay, we've got some questions. Daniel, if you can unmute yourself, you can go ahead and speak.
Yes, hi. I have 2 questions. Will this be under FDIC control, or will there be its own independent California public insurance as far as for funds? I was wondering to address that for people that might be concerned about that issue.
Paulina, do you want to take this?
So the banks will be the funds will be held in participating institutions with FDIC insurance.
Okay, so it still will be under federal.
Yes.
Okay.
There is partnership with financial
partnership
that are
financial
FDIC insured.
Okay, great. And my second question is, I was just wondering how we can help to fight against what I'm pretty sure imagine would be, the federal banks, the Wall Street banks. I mean, are going to put a lot of lobbying into this against this because it's obviously against their best interest, and they have a lot of power and funds, and they would love not to see this bill ever see the light of day. So how can we help to lobby ourselves, since we're not really big financial institutions, but more individuals?
Well, that's a great question. And I think, you know, what we proved with AB 857, that was an entirely volunteer-led campaign that took on the Wall Street establishment and Wall Street lobbyists and won. And we did that by mobilizing constituents into a political force. We built citizens lobbying teams that were able to lobby assembly members and senators in their district. We built political support by bringing on labor and getting endorsements of city councils and Democratic Central Committees and delegates and community organizations, social justice allies, environmental allies, organizations across the board in California. You know, with our expansive coalition representing over 10 cities in California, we were really able to build political power within our local network and redirect that towards Sacramento. So it's going to be the similar template for 1177. It's about building political power and mobilizing people into political force.
Oh, great. And are you pretty confident that we can do this, that this is a possible, viable thing that we can do as people and passing in California?
Absolutely.
Take it away, Felipe. Absolutely.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the people-led movement of before has an additional, you know, labor-led movement that we've added on with SEIU California and our brothers and sisters on the local on this call, and we'll continue to advocate for the entire federation to come on in California.
Thank you, guys. You're doing a great job. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for sharing the call.
One other idea that we keep mentioning as well is the parallels with this and Cal Savers. And if you think about when Cal Savers came into existence, everyone thought that all of the mutual fund companies and big entities would come out against it. And in some ways, we've got to keep bringing up Cal Savers at every turn that we can. And from the conversations we've been having, this is not necessarily a line of business that the big banks want to take on. They have systematically excluded this population. So in some ways, we're going to try to drive as many wedges as we can into the vast, terrain that is financial services, and try to increase understanding of why this is maybe not something that they need to be so threatened by. You know, at first blush, they might think they are, but the more they hear about it, hopefully from other validators that aren't just all of us, but like Treasury and other people that can speak up on this as well.
Thank you, Michelle. Philip, would you like to unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, loud and clear.
Thank you, Trinity. I'm concerned about, I just spent a few hours reading through AB 1177, and it's kind of difficult to wade your way through, but I was mainly concerned to learn how it is proposed that the activities, that the establishment and the activities of Cal Bank are going to be funded. And all I was able to discover in the bill itself was a statement that it will be funded for the first 6 years by allocations from the state general fund. At the same time, it says elsewhere in the bill that it'll be at no cost to taxpayers. And I don't understand how general fund allocations are not, or appropriations are not a cost to taxpayers. And I'm wondering what the authors of the bill intend to do to make sure that it shows clearly, not just in some vague way, as is currently the case, but shows clearly and in detail how the establishment of the bank will be financed and how its continuing operations will be financed. So.
Hey, Philip, thank you for that question. And Michelle, you can jump in here too if I misstate anything or if I'm not clear. But yeah, so we expect that the bank will be fully sustainable through transaction fees paid by the merchant through swipes in about 4 to 6 years. So it will take some general fund money at the beginning to get it up and running. And we think that that is, a important investment by the state of California, given that the exclusion of these communities of Black, Latino, Asian, Indigenous communities over the course of generations by Wall Street. And that actually was fully backed by the government, through redlining. And so, but we do expect it to be sustainable in about 4 to 6 years through those transaction fees through the swipes.
And then another piece of the funding is we've also written in about foundation support. And as we've begun this campaign around this bill, there is a tremendous amount of foundation support for financial advocacy, financial access. And even when other programs were established in the similar to this, like Cal Savers, Cal Kids, there was outside foundation funding that went into those program startups. So we'll look for that as well. And we wrote language into the bill specifically for that.
Thank you for those answers. I have another concern, which is that the program relies on 3 different administrative bodies, one being the board, one being the program administrator, and the other being the something else administrator. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the actual wording. But nowhere does it say, well, it does say that the board members are going to be volunteers, that they will not receive recompense for their activity as board members. That worries me because they have a lot of power. And if we're dealing with people who are basically doing it as a sideline and they can't be reimbursed for any of the expenses aside from their travel expenses, which is what the bill says, I'm not clear that they're going to be able to really do a responsible job. And nowhere, furthermore, does it say what the salaries of the program administrators are going to be. So are those things going to get cleared up as the development of the bill proceeds?
Philip, if you'd like, maybe we can follow up with you offline on some of these questions. I've served on boards for the state as a volunteer, and I'd be happy to talk with you more about this. But I know we have a lot of questions in the chat, and as well as hands raised. And I wonder, Trinity, if we can maybe move to some of those questions. But I'd be happy, Phil, and Philip. Sorry, I'm being more familiar with you than I am, and I could put my email in the chat.
Great, thank you, Paulina.
Great. Thank you, Paulina. Thank you, Philip. We'll go to Shirley.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm really excited about the possibility of 1177, so thank you to all the organizers. My name is Shirley and I work with an organization called My Path, and I have the honor and privilege of working with a group of marginalized folks of color who also need to be thought about in terms of democratizing finance, which is young BIPOC workers, right? Black, Indigenous youth of color who are growing up in redline communities. And so my question is around young people who are old enough to work, right? But they're not old enough to bank on their own, right? And many of us adults, we think of young people as children or dependents under their parents, but we forget that young people who are actually on the cusp of transitioning, some of us maybe a little bit further from this time, but from young people to actually adulthood and independence, right? And they're all this during the second major recession in their young lives. My question is around access to youth who are needing non-custodial accounts. So a lot of banks require young people to have a parent or guardian, but there's a lot of nuanced barriers that our young people are telling us, if I'm a foster youth, I can't get an account. If I'm a young person who has a parent in check systems, I'm locked out of the system. If I have a parent or I myself have an I-10, I'm going to check cashers, right? Or using payday lenders. And so I wanted to see if I could set up a meeting sometime with some of the organizers to have our young people have a little bit more nuanced conversation about the specific barriers that they're facing, so we can make sure to include BIPOC young workers in the conversation as well.
Sure, that's a really important point. And the legislation does allow for the board, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, but the board to allow for young people to be a part of the program and be a part of account holders. So we're excited about that, and I think it'll be really important for us to have a conversation about that. Thank you for raising that issue.
Thank you, Paulina.
And Shirley, just to underscore, within the union, that was tremendously important with the workers that we deal with. This comes up all the time. So yes, we would love to have you in the conversation. Thanks for raising it.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Greg. Greg Bartlett, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry about that. Had to figure out where all the buttons are. I don't usually do this on mobile. I love this idea. I love this concept. And I guess I'm concerned, like, to get buy-in of people who are not who don't need public banking. It feels like public banking has a lot of assets for everyone else as well, right? In terms of reinvesting in community and stuff like that. Is that something that we could see some further, like how to help sell it to my friends kind of thing?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm not sure you
I
understand.
could-
Greg, are you talking
Yeah.
about reinvestment, like as in a bank reinvesting, or not sure I understand?
Yeah, so how does public banking help people who don't need it? I guess what are ways that we can pitch it to people who are the decision makers who generally aren't the same people who need public banking?
So this bill, the California public banking option, is part of a larger public banking ecosystem. So this bill doesn't create a state bank. This is one part of or offers the retail side of what a California state bank could be. But this is part of a very necessary step to allowing funds to be able to be accessed by people who have been shut out of the system. As far as reinvestment and public banking, that's about redirecting the flow of money, which right now our cities and states put billions of dollars in Wall Street banks. That money is being used for extractive purposes, to fund fossil fuel projects, to fund private prisons. So the greater public banking movement is about redirecting that flow of money back into the cities to reinvest back into the things that we need to utilize those funds to instead fund affordable housing and green energy directives, solutions to homelessness, things that we need that right now Wall Street is extracting those funds away from our city. So this is part of our longer game for the public banking movement. This is part of our longer game strategy to create an entirely publicly owned system. This program sets up what could potentially be a public-private partnership. The public banking movement is focused on creating, this is an incremental step, and then a very important incremental step towards our end game of creating an entirely publicly owned system, banking for the people and accountable to the community.
Thank you.
Trinity, can I take a question from the chat?
Please.
From Donisha Smith with the County of Los Angeles. She asked will credit unions and CDFIs be able to participate? And so the answer is yes, credit unions could be participating partners as a financial institution. But CDFIs, Michelle, if they are depositories, is that something that they could be a participating partner?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yes.
And while you called on Donisha, she's been running a great program, Bank On, in the Office of Financial Empowerment. And I'm really glad that Donisha's on the call, just to also acknowledge that.
Yeah, me too. Hi, Donisha.
There are quite a few.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
There's quite a few questions. So anyone on the panel, if you see one, please help me moderate this. I'm trying to sift through this.
Marisabel Torres from Center for Responsible Lending. Maybe you can answer this, Trinity. Is this dependent upon the establishment of regional banks under AB 857? Would the accounts be held in those banks?
So this legislation, AB 1177, actually creates a provision for the bank CAL programs to potentially be able to be held by local public banks. Once they are, if local public banks are interested in creating a retail structure and a network of ATMs and build out the infrastructure to hold the bank CAL accounts, that could be a potential in the future. And same with postal banking. If postal offices are interested in at some point being able to build out the infrastructure to hold these accounts, that could potentially be one of the administrators for Bank CAL program. And then I'm looking at Patrick's question, when will AB 1177 be introduced? The language should be up on the BankCal Now website next week. It's right now in Legislative Council, so we expect the full text of the bill language to be available next week. So if you log into bankcalnow.com, it should link to that, to the bill language next week. But will be officially introducing this bill at the end of the month on March 30th at 10 a.m. That is going to be our official Zoom press conference that Assemblymember Miguel Santiago will be speaking at, along with other allies. So please keep that date in your calendar, March 30th at 10 a.m. And the second part is, it looks like AB 1177 is a placeholder bill. Yes, it is. Currently, if you go on the Leginfo website, it is a placeholder bill. And as I mentioned, that language, the full text of the language should be available next week. And Susan Harmon, the Postal Workers Union contract, including starting 5 pilot postal banks. SEIU should be in touch with APWU to have these pilots be in California, and those pilots should be eligible for BankCal subsidies. We think that's a great idea. If APWU or postal banks are interested in potentially being administrators of the BankCal program, we would be absolutely supportive of that, keeping the program in a public space. Thank you, Tom, for answering that question. Will the public bank have the same protections as do regular banks in terms of up to 250,000? You're talking about, Gina, I assume you're talking about FDIC protection. The BankCal program will have FDIC protection through its partnership with FDIC insured financial institutions. Will participating banks receive CRA credit for handling public bank funds? Yes.
That's a
Paulina,
great
you
question.
want to take that?
That is a great question. So right now the CRA rules are being rewritten, and we're by the Federal Reserve, and we are suing the OCC for gutting the CRA under Trump. And so what we did prior for a similar program for waiving ATM fees for public benefit recipients is we were able to successfully get them to give CRA credit for that. So I think that this is a great carrot for banks to get CRA credit. So I think that's something that we would advocate for. I think it's a great idea. Yes, it's the Community Reinvestment Act. We're talking acronyms sometimes. Thanks, Michael.
So I see a hand raised from Daniel.
Yes, hi. Just a question came up when you were talking. This is a particular. This is going to be under the Greater as I understand it, the Greater California banking umbrella. This is probably not the place, but I was wondering. You had been to other banking. Where is the public, and what is the bill? Are you guys still pursuing the public banking, the Greater California public banking bill, and what is that? What is if it's still going on, and when will it be reintroduced? Because I remember there were problems with that the first time.
You're talking about AB 310, the
AB
California.
that's it.
Yes. So we're working on this bill in addition to our local public banking initiatives. So all of the Alliance member cities right now in LA, San Diego, East Bay, San Francisco, among others, are all working on their local initiatives in addition to 1177, and then soon to be announced is AOC's reintroduction of her Federal Public Banking Act bill. AB 310 right now is on hold. That was our bold initiative to capitalize the California State Public Bank by tapping into the PMIA funds, which is essentially the state's checking account. That had a little bit of a pushback from the Treasurer and Controller's office. So we're on hold on AB 310 now as we move these initiatives along. But we actually just had a very positive call with the Treasurer's office on AB 1177. So hoping that relationship will then build inroads for us to approach our bolder initiative with creating a California state public bank.
Okay, great. So you're still pursuing that? Okay, great.
Yes, we're moving on multiple axes right now.
Thank you, Trinity. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take one more question, and I think we're going to wrap with next steps. So Terry, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, hello. I just became familiar with something that's going on. ACLU is sponsoring or helps supporting an initiative that will turn U.S. post offices into banking services, offering money orders and other services for the underbanked and the unbanked. And I'm wondering how that would conflict or not with the public banking bills. Are you familiar with what I'm referring to?
Yes, and I think that maybe I could answer this one because this has come up a lot. Because that's not an option today in March of 2021, and we have great hopes to get this bill passed as quickly as possible. What the language does is it sets up a way that the board, that this oversight board, will put out RFPs to select what are the institutions that offer this service and what institutions can then partner with this. Once those postal service banks are here, they can be an option. Again, it was like, we don't have a statewide public bank, so that's not the option. So we're kind of working with what we have and setting up as democratic as we can make it board that will make decisions for this public option that hold to the spirit of what the public banks, the postal service banks could do. Yeah, but we're following that. Our whole coalition team's been looking at that.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Terry. Lucille, would you like to put up the screen, the next step screen? There we go. So this is our ask of everyone. Once again, we want to thank everyone, all of our allies and all of our friends from the movement for joining today's Advocates briefing call. And of course, thank you to our presenters, Paulina, Miguel, Felipe, and thanks to Cecile and Michelle with SEIU for helping coordinate this call. For our next steps, we're asking all allies to please endorse this. You can endorse as individuals, as an individual, you can, and as also as organization. And you can go to bankcalnow.com. Cecile had dropped that. Both Cecile and Tom had dropped the link in the chat earlier. So bankcalnow.com. Also in Spanish at bankcalahora.com. So endorse and then amplify the movement. Save the date for March 30th. That is going to be our big official campaign rollout, Tuesday, March 30th at 10 a.m. We will be launching AB 1177 with a Zoom press conference. As I mentioned earlier, Assemblymember Miguel Santiago will be there, Assemblymember Mike Gibson, among other co-authors. We also have SEIU President Joseph, the President of SEIU 1021, Joseph Bryant, who will be joining us. Paulina will be joining us, as well as workers who have been impacted by the financial system, who will also be there to share their story. And speaking of sharing stories, SEIU has tapped into this great platform called Soapbox to be able to help the members of the public amplify their voices. So if you have had experiences as an unbanked, underbanked person, if you've had to turn to high-cost services for basic banking needs, if you've had predatory experiences with Wall Street banks, for organizations on this call, if you have clients, friends and families who've had difficulty accessing banking services, we want to hear your stories. So go on to bankcalnow.com, also in Spanish at bankcalahora.com, and upload your story so that we can share that, because it's so crucial that that we hear how this is going to help the most impacted of communities. At the end of the day, public banking is about putting power of money back into the hands of the people and our local communities, and getting that out of the hands of Wall Street banks. And this has been a priority agenda for the California Public Banking Alliance and our statewide allies and organization. So we again thank you for joining this call to build a more equitable future. And please support the movement by going to bankcalnow.com. And with that, thank you everyone for joining us.